The museum for the first time. Dr. Dasgupta is an art historian, he's a curator and professor. He is teaching at Vishwabharati in Shantiniketan, where he studied art history from Shantiniketan, then from MS University Baroda, and also film appreciation from FTII Pune. Dr. Anshuman Dasgupta is very widely published. He's published essays, he's done several important curatorial projects, one of which he is going to be presenting here today, called the Bauhaus Imaginista, through this talk, which is about the everyday life as a model of education in Shantiniketan and its curatorial afterlife. So I'll now invite Dr. Dasgupta to talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Pooja, for your kind introduction. Thank you, the entire team, Bhau Daji Museum, and Tasneem Mehta to invite me, to have invited me. It's an honor to be able to speak here where my colleagues, distinguished colleagues like Shiv Kumar and Sanjay Mullik had spoken before. I didn't have an experience of talking here, and I didn't know the audience. I don't know you as yet. I had only yesterday, I've been teaching yesterday and today. So I know a little bit of some of you, not the entire team, not the entire congregation. But thank you very much for coming, spending your Saturday evening as it is. I hope I won't disappoint you. It's just kind of one of those things like, can you hear me without the mic? Yeah. Oh, you're recording, so. There had been like Shantiniketan, I just introduced informally that Shantiniketan is a place that is least known to many of the city dwellers in India. That is what one of my filmmaker friends from Bombay just forewarned me today. And he said also this gives us an opportunity to listen to, he had already made a film on Shantiniketan, so he knows Shantiniketan. So he told me that so that's necessary, but also it's not known. Shantiniketan is not known very much, very well. So it is an opportunity to introduce it to you and also to see it as without loading it too much with what we carry in our head, like too much of theory. I'll just try to skim through the theoretical part and just see what we can make out of both the everyday life as a pedagogic scheme in Shantiniketan and its curatorial possibilities as explored in two different projects that we had undertaken before. One is called Santal Family, and these are all transnational projects which attracted much international attention, but in India, a lot of people don't know about it. In Dhaka, people know about it. So that's interesting. And one of them is based on a single freestanding outdoor sculpture in Shantiniketan called Santal Family, which is already made famous by Ramkinkar Bej. And we sort of built up around that sculpture in the first project. The second project, it was my dream project. Second project was Bauhaus Imaginista, which is pronounced as Imaginista by the Germans, which is based on, again, multiple things. One, springboard is the Bauhaus's 100 years. Bauhaus is a design school in Germany which started in the same year as Kala Bhavan in Shantiniketan. And Tagore had incidentally brought the exhibition over, Bauhaus exhibition over to Calcutta, which is the first European exhibition outside Europe, apparently I'm told, and to Calcutta in 1922. And so those people were witness, who saw it, were witness to an international trouvaille of artworks which were kind of, to some extent, were path-breaking and showing new ways, like, you know, who were there in that. Paul Klee, Metzinzer, and Kandinsky, and people like them, Johannes Eaton, and people like them. So it sort of really shook up quite a few things, expectations largely of the viewers. The pedagogic movement, my title is Everyday Life as a Model of Education and in Shantiniketan and its curatorial afterlife. While founding the university in Shantiniketan, Rabindranath Tagore had some doubts. He wanted to make a first global university in the village Shantiniketan, where the art department called Kala Bhavan had already started. Now, Tagore wrote to Rodenstein, who was a director of RCA, Royal College of Art, from Boulogne-sur-Seine, France. When I sent my appeal to Western people for an international institution in India, I made use of the word university for the sake of convenience. But that word not merely has an inner meaning, but an outer association in minds of those who use it. And that idea tortures my idea into its own rigid shape. It is unfortunate. I should not allow my idea to be pinned toward like a dead butterfly for a foreign museum. It must not be known by a definition, but by its own live growth. I saved my Shantiniketan from being trampled into a smoothness by the steamroller of your education department. It is poor in resources and equipment, but it has wealth of truth that no money can ever buy. I'm proud of the fact that it is not a machine-made article perfectly modeled in your workshop. It is our very own. If we must have an university, it should spring for our life and be sustained by it. He says he's probably overambitious to have come begging at the door of the rich West. This is the first time that I came to the foreign door asking for help and cooperation, but such help has to be bought with a price that is ruinous, and the bird has to accept its cage if it has to be fed with comfort and regularity. However, my bird must retain its freedom of wings and not be turned into sumptuous non-entity by a controlling agency outside its own living organism. I know that the idea of an international university is complex, but I must take it simple in my own way. I shall be content if it attracts round it men who have neither name nor worldly means, but have the mind and faith, who are to create a great future with their dreams. Very likely, I shall never be able to work in harmony with a broad board of trustees, influential and highly respectable, for I am a vagabond at heart. But the powerful people may make it difficult to carry out my work. There are a few key points highlighted in the quoted letter which will then guide the overall course of subsequent actions and directions that a nascent university would take. Museum building was one of them, because Kala Bhavan and the building of an archival system, a trove, an inventory of cultures, so as to fall back on them whenever a new visual vocabulary is needed. Now, they were starting from blank, in the empty space of Shantiniketan. They didn't have a syllabus, they didn't want a syllabus. And so they wanted to build up something, a set of resources, so as to a resource pool from which the artist and the students could draw. The search, as may agree, were largely semantic, the expansion of which provide variation to cultural habits, and that was understood to be central discourse of an indigenous modernism in Shantiniketan. The main aim was an archive of senses with many stoppage points and habitual exchanges in everyday life that helped build up a community. Now, having narrated the foundational logic, we can then take you through the details of that logic that compared based with Bauhaus by the logic of parallelism with a difference. There are three different accents which come up as translations of those metaphoric relationships expressed by Tagore in the rudimentary form. One is the idea of attending to the spread of Indian cultural resources and their trace through journeys to non-Western and contiguous spaces of Southeast Asia. Number two is institution building through personal and public means. Public means is museum building in a rudimentary form, and communiques, communication, such as postcards, and which are private modes of communication, and also by narrating the process of collecting artifacts as teaching tools. Then number 3 is the personality buildings, which Tagore equated with art. He said art is a means of personality building. Basically, he equated art with personality building. So art is a way of making beings. So actually, if you are into arts, that sort of transforms yourself. The transformative power of art itself is something that he indicated when he said personality building. And the recycling through the spread of paradigmatic dissemination, like model making, through model making. These form the few stoppage points which mark the formation of institution in various senses. We can enumerate, we can just talk about some of the stoppage points in that journey. The suggestion of journey is both literal and metaphoric, and in a letter to Nirmala Kumari Mahalavish, Tagore wrote from Java. Now, after a long deliberation, the untamed drive for power and greed that Europe showed, he concluded the passage by saying that practice should remember that it was in the middle of the First World War that this thing was happening. So it's before 1919. So between that time, he had a huge dilemma he had huge question about all those jingoistic nationalism which led to First World War in the first place. The First World War and the Second World War are the wars which redefined Europe, not only in terms of ethnicity and its configuration, but in terms of its territoriality. The territorial nation of Europe that we know of were not made before those wars. So in fact, it was a territorial nationalism that led to the war, and that also defined to some extent strictly the European border. Now the current crisis of Brexit-related crisis could refer back to that period as well. Like the current globalization refers back to 1905, state of globalization, when European investment outside Europe was maximum, which current world order is trying desperately to match up to and hasn't been. Now, after long deliberation, European greed, he says that the passage by saying that practice that unites science's achievement is religion. He doesn't say religion in that sense of religion, but / ethics. He uses the term dharma. Dharma is ethics for him, not religion particularly. So it's like Manav Dharma is human religion, it's like humanity. Later, in answering the question that he himself asked, why am I debating this while traveling to Java? Each time he traveled to a country, he had begun with a question, like while going to Japan, he was asking questions about industrial development. While traveling through Ganges, on both sides of Ganges, if you recount, in Calcutta at the time, they were compared with Manchester because they were all spewing smokes. There were these jute mills on both sides of the river, Calcutta. And so while going to the dock on a steamer, he's asking these questions of industrial development and its fallout, pollution as its fallout at that time, way back, in about 100 years back. So he's asking himself, why am I debating this while traveling to Java? The reason he states is Indian knowledge had traveled outside of India, but they were accepted with enthusiasm by the outsiders. We are now on a pilgrimage to trace the sign of all-pervasive Indian knowledge, that all-pervasive Indian knowledge. Now, this is very close to what Edward Said says in Orientalism. In the opening sentence, he says, though in reverse, completely in reverse, he says that colonialism has left its trace upon all of us, and it's our task to inventory those traces upon us. So inventory is used as Bhau here. And here it's just in reverse because a lot of cultures had borrowed from India and they had preserved it in their own form, in different forms, like in Java, Sumatra, Bali, etc., etc. You can see Buddhism traveled from here. you can see various forms of non-sectarian Hinduism had also traveled from here and taken root there. And then they gave a form to it in the, they gave an artistic form to it when they translated them with the help of their local cultures. So they took a different hybrid form. So he says that it's our task to trace it back and so as to enrich our own knowledge. Now, these are some of the pages of that first book of museums that Nandalal Bose very carefully kept. He was his lieutenant who started Shantiniketan, the art school in Shantiniketan, Nandalal Bose, and he kept very regularly this record in the museum. This is a museum book. It's written Kala Bhavan on top, on the right, and this is a museum catalog, and hand-drawn, because he didn't quite like photography. So he hand-drew it, each object. And these are all Balinese and Javanese puppets. And he not only drew the puppet, the outer form, but he cataloged them and labeled them. And also, they were done with the aim to replicate them. Because they are puppets, there are rod puppets, there are string puppets, there are different kind of puppets, not glove puppet, rod and string. But they have mechanisms by which they move. And so he studied them so that we can actually replicate them. If the students want, they can replicate them. You can see the characters in the puppet. Earlier the instruments and their functioning, then the characters, then characters, more characters. King, frog, frogman, animals, carefully drawn. Then various kinds of decorative objects, ritual objects, and then tools, various kinds of tools. The department too in the production process, the tools that produces the objects, which is important material for artists, basically, the tools. For the sculptors, for the painters, for everyone, the tool is very important. The brush, the type of brush, the kind of paint that you use, the kind of paper you use, they're extremely careful about that. Bauhaus, incidentally, taught the students that. The first few years of orientation course in Bauhaus has taught the students, the German students, or students from all over the world, largely Europe, taught them, introduced them to the formal properties of art. Then, through the second and third year, I have studied the syllabus of those. There was no curriculum, but there was a certain kind of syllabus, a certain kind of curriculum. Kalabhavan started without a curriculum because Nandalal never liked a curriculum, nor did Tagore like, Rabindranath like. So they started with exemplars, not with curriculum. But Bauhaus had also a flexible plan. Like first year was just introduction to various forms, and then introduction to various material, so that you can access this material and turn them into forms, give them shapes, and introduction to necessary tools to give them shapes. So there are workshops from which the students will learn without having a fixed model, because we are working under different models. You have Eaton, you have Paul Klee, you have Kandinsky, you have great teachers like that who could transform experiences into realities, of artistic realities. So experiences turn into artistic, so that's translatory process which these very deft teachers of Bauhaus were capable of. And similarly, you have not only Nandalal, but this is by Suren Kaur, and he sort of recorded this, the sling in beautiful, beautiful Chinese sling in his drawings, and sent it by post to a friend, to a colleague, so that it goes on record. And a community is formed through these exchanges. Letters from various places formed an important resource for the sustenance of this community. In the wake of Karu Sangha, there was a kind of new group, that self-sustaining artist group that formed with the help of Nandalal, that they were given pieces of land to build up their houses, because at the time, the salary was not much in Shantiniketan. There was very little paltry salary, so they couldn't build their own houses. I mean, they couldn't buy lands and build their. So it was given as a cooperative system, and so that they can build houses. Similar thing happens in Bauhaus. There were master houses which were kept as quarters, and that belonged to Walter Gropius and Johannes Eaton and several others. Laszlo Moholy-Nagy and people. In the wake of Karusanga, a craft guild comprising of artists willing to craft to sustain themselves, produce craft to sustain themselves, apart from doing art. Already there was this art craft project in Shantiniketan. They wanted to produce, bridge the gap between the art and the craft. Almost there's a, there's a almost like a casteism between art and craft, because craftsmen are craftsmen, artists are artists. Artists have a halo around them, craftsmen don't. Like we discussed that in the classroom, some of them who actually attended know it, that already that what kind of difference between artists and craftsmen. You have, craftsmen never sign their work, right? A welder doesn't come and sign his or her work. A caster never signs his or her work. It's not his or her work. He or she is working for somebody else. So that's where the difference lies. So division of labor, basically. In 1917 to 1924, you can see the futurism in different countries. Futurism, Russian futurism, and Bauhaus in the West tried to bridge the gap, as was also attempted in Shantiniketan. So it was transnationally relatable, you can see. It was relatable globally. So you have a view of Prabhat Mohan's letter, Nandalal's letter to Prabhat Mohan Bandyopadhyay, who was also a freedom fighter and a student of Kalabhavan of the early days. This letter says that, "Dear Prabhat, I am worried not getting any news from you. Either Vinod Babu or I may have to go to Puri for works of Congress," which is like, there this Haripura and Tripuri Congress, which they had done posters for, and numerous posters, and for which they got paid also. So it was like a commission work. So Nandalal was inviting them to come and assist him so that they can earn some money and also can do the work. They said 2 persons have to stay there, either you and I or you and Vinod. About 400 putters of 2 by 2 are to be painted there. The deal is not yet confirmed. I shall inform you later when it is done. If you wish to take the whole order, it might be arranged. Each putter will be priced at 4 annas, and the total work should be done within 15 to 20 days, very precise. I shall arrange to give you a few more artists. You may complete the work with their help. The paintings will be on paper. I'll arrange for rupees 150, etc., etc. Then the personal news. They were very intimate. And the second postcard, I won't dwell upon that, but it's like a kind of postcard depicting some pictures, which later on this gentleman collects on his visit to that place. So, so in a sense, sometimes object precedes drawing, sometimes drawing precedes the object. So it's a curiosity circuit that he is building through a curiosity about the object, about the craft object. It's a lota, basically. As lota collected from Bhagalpur, and there are several such things in their collection, because it was both Nandalal and Rabindranath Tagore's idea that unless you record them, some of those crafts would vanish. Like he and Rabindranath went around collecting lullaby, children's rhymes, and which were there, available in village Bengal and everywhere else as well. Every language has its lullaby. So his idea was that if you don't collect them, one day they will be lost. They will be lost soon. So they collected Lalan's song as well as lullaby. They collected very well-known Sufi songs as well as lullabies from various sources, so as to build up an inventory, like I said, inventory of culture. This is the actual lota, which was collected after the drawing. So he got interested, he collected that. Now this is a report about a graphic workshop that had taken place recently in Kalabhavan. So kind of set of information that would later on for posterity, for the historical posterity, will be useful information because you get to know what was going on in that particular year. There was a graphic workshop. And he had, as an example, printed a small truck that he had drawn in that graphic workshop on the postcard itself. Now, next is that those community buildings, like they were building together a kind of a community building called Black House, and it was reported back in the woodcut by this Ramkanai Samanta in the Vishwabharati News in 1936, in the same year as the building. So immediately it got reported in the local journal. So when it gets distributed, people get to know there's a new building in the campus, and it's called Black House. Anybody who been there knows that building, you can't miss it. It has got sculptures, reliefs all over, done by the students of that time, and each student signed their name. There are Sinhalese names, as well as Thai names, and various names written in various Indian languages, Tamil, Telugu, Bengali, and so on, Hindi, and so on. So you have various names on that. And sometimes Bengali is signed in Hindi so that other people can read it, the name. And this is a woodcut. So I just wanted to show the woodcut so that you know that it was in circulation. This is the building as of now. Students still stay there. For a brief while it was a studio, but for the rest of the time it was a boys' hostel. And it's fascinating for a boys' hostel because it's both sides, it has windows on both sides. It has veranda on one side, and it has certain rooms have multiple entrances. So that's interesting for a hostel. No other hostel has multiple entrances. I never saw a hostel design where there are multiple entrances. And so it makes it interesting, like you can come out through that or come out through this. You can surprise somebody. So surprise was part of the educational system. This is the first page of the roster that they maintained in the first year. This started from 1921 because Nandalal joined at the time, because first 2 years were managed by Asit Haldar as the principal in the helm, because Nandalal was in dilemma whether to join or not. He came several times from 1919 to 21 to understand the work that he has to take up, but then he finally joined. The first set of students were, as is written on the left, are Hirachad Dugar, Ardhendu Banerjee, Dhiren Krishna Debbarman, Warrior, Mani Gupta, Birbhadra Chitra, is a Nepalese artist, Raman Chakraborty, Kiran Bala Sen, Sukumari Devi, Savita Thakur, Satyan Bishi, Basudevan, Kanu Desai. So the people from the south as well as from Gujarat and from Nepal in the first year's batch. Then there were this fun fest. This is announcement of a funny lottery in which somebody's chappal, somebody's pen, somebody's motorcycle, and somebody's oil machine, somebody's tower clock, somebody's hat will be all auctioned. And this poster is done by Nandalal himself. So it's like basically laughing at yourself. And these are details of those lottery cheats, the small slips he used to issue. This is Sister Mira's oil pickles, Miradi's oil pickle. Nandalal's anklet. Nandalal's anklet is gongur, like in a sense as if he's going to dance. He's wearing a sari on your right. You can see he's made a self-portrait of himself as a woman dancing and amusing a child. And then you have the pages of Sahaj Path, which is like Bengali primer, which became widespread. We studied while we were in school, and still kids study. Its royalty goes to the university. I don't think it's much, but still the royalty goes to the university. It is a token, but still, if 1 million copies sells, then it's a lot of money. At that time, it counted because they needed, university needed money from all the sources. These are some of the photographs. These are some of the drawings after done from the potsherds from museum by Suren Kaur. And following the example of Nandalal, he sent back from various museums. These are from British Museum collection. And then leading to a certain kind of ethnographic shorthand, like Suren Kaur also similarly reported back on Malaysian and Chinese actresses and their behavior pattern, their dresses, their gesticulations, etc., the gait, the style, etc., elaborately, including this Nandalal's, the toys from village Bengal. These are Notungram toys, wooden toys from Bengal, so that they can be replicated or they can be adapted in certain way. A few woodblock prints, they used to collect exemplars for the textile design collection. So you have seen the whole range, and many of the letters are very personal. Now, he is reporting back on his retirement. He's announcing his retirement to one of his favorite students, Indu Lekha Ghosh, on 25th April 1951. He's saying, I just retired today, handed over my charge. Then later to Kaur, Suren Kaur, Sudhir Khastagir, contains all the details of movement of people and events on a daily basis in Shantiniketan. These are all before retirement, of course. Left and middle, you can see two examples of Nandalal's teaching method. In one from Vision and Creation, the other one is quoted by Vinod Barry in his book on modern art education, which was written in Bengali, still not translated. And on the right, you can see this whole transformative scheme by Nandalal's daughter, who incidentally was also a teacher in Kala Bhavan, who is importantly because we don't discuss women teachers in Kala Bhavan. They are some of those very rare women teachers, but very significant because she taught all the decorative aspects in the design department, like Alpana and Alpana, the floral decoration, largely done by women. But in Kala Bhavan, a lot of men actually took over, and we have seen male teachers doing very good floral decoration because they were taken out from rituals and elaborated and took a proliferation in the hands of the designers. So they improved on the design. So it's like a design improvement program, which now fascinates over the last 50 years the design schools like NID, etc., MIT, and IDC, etc. They call it design development. So this you can take as an example of design development from everyday life, because Alpana was part of everyday life of the ritual, etc., etc. But it was taken out of ritual and given. In the middle, you can see the transformative aspects of natural objects like seeds, the shapes. Now, it has a fascinating semblance to Bauhaus mode of teaching. And Paul Klee's book of Nature of Nature and Thinking I, these two volumes, his notebooks, pedagogic notebooks, and his pedagogic notebooks are also very important references which comes to mind. The archiving led not only to systematize the design efforts and their translations, but to personality building. Like our third stoppage point, we said, is personality building, how a personality is built. One is on the left, you can see, is Vinod Barry, who was an artist who turned blind not very early, but in the mid-career, but had a very weak eyesight. But that's not very important. Wouldn't have been very important unless he was perspicacious about it. So you can see here, he's doing a self-portrait in which he's gone very close to the object he's painting, and everything is vanishing gradually, going out of focus. Only the craft objects are in focus. He himself gradually goes out of focus. And on the right-hand side is Ramkinkar Bej, whose Santal family became, almost a signpost of Indian modern art. And also he became an exemplar of some kind of a subaltern character, somebody who is come from absolutely down below to rise up to the top of Indian art, in fact. And I would argue, global art scene of the contemporary time, because he quite easily, fascinatingly, places himself, can be placed in the global art scene of that time when he made this, 1938. The book on modern art education, he has seen some examples of that before. This is Vinod Barry's book, cover on the right. He quotes from Nandalal's page on design. Now, left and right are kind of slightly topsy-turvy slides. They're of pages of Vinod Barry's notebook, and it shows some of the studies, very acute studies of some of the flowers and flora and fauna which fascinated him. On the right, you can see a couple of examples from just before when he turned blind, 1954, 57, he turns blind completely. But he prepares himself, according to so many, including Nilima Sheikh, who wrote in a catalog essay that Vinod Barry was preparing himself. It looks like he was preparing himself for the blindness, because a blind man cannot see. So then if you want to paint, you have to schematize the painting. You have to schematize, bring it to a schema, so that you can, it's within your grasp. It doesn't become out of control, because you can't see anymore. So now you have to fill by touch. So you know this much area should be red, this much area. So area-wise, you are making it modular. On Mukherjee, K.G. Subramanian says, what makes him an artist without dilemma is probably the fact that instead of depending entirely on the conventional vocabularies of the East or the West, he started his work with a terminological search. Strangely enough, this can perhaps be attributed to early interest in Far Eastern calligraphic painting. Although linear perspective calligraphy was not unusual in various forms of Indian art, like you could say Mughal painting or Pahari painting, although linear calligraphy was not unusual in various forms of Indian art, from the hieratic to the folk, calligraphic painting of the Far Eastern type involved a terminological equivalence of tool mark and visual image, which was something different altogether. The basic ingredient of such work, it had to be authentic and original, had to be evolved in each situation, which is another way of saying to paint the gaudy Palash and Simul, which are kind of Bengali name for two kind of flowers which comes to bloom during this season, the spring, and land lotus, Sthala Padma. In the sun-drenched landscape of Bengal countryside, the conventions used to paint the pine, the bamboo, and the peony against the misty mountain landscapes of China and Japan are hardly adequate. So the same scheme is not adequate for India or from Birbhum, which is a dry district, completely dry laterite soil. And so you can't just, and blazing sun at that time. So you can't use the Far Eastern scheme, which has a mist in it all the time. You will see Far Eastern landscapes, they're all misty landscapes, full of mist. So mountain landscapes of China and Japan are hardly adequate. The terms have to be sought anew. So the terminological equivalences. Then the schematization of the spaces. This is a campus life. On the left are those Tibetan Department people, the monks mostly. At the time they were thronged with monks, filled with monks from Tibetan monks who taught Tibetology. And then hostel scenes, student exchanges, classroom, and a couple of times he appears there in the scene. There's a misconception, popular misconception about Shantiniketan, which is that anatomy was not taught. Because curriculum was not there, it was not registered, but both Vinod Barry and Dampikar made their own research on anatomy. This is few pages of his anatomical notebook, and which he wrote back to his doctor. He sent to his grandson for opinion. And the doctor grandson of his brother's daughter's son, and Debashish Bhattacharya, who opined on that very kindly and then asked a few questions which are relevant for the artist, that how relevant is anatomy for the artist? That was the question. And in answering that, Vinod Barry gave a few fascinating kind of answers. These are some of the pages. Now, first few pages were filled with Gray's anatomy. Then he comes to dwell upon the anatomy of the interpretive aspect of anatomy, like how do you interpret it through cultural sieve, the anatomy. Because each drawing is done traditionally by a certain kind of cultural interpretation of the body. And it's not without that interpretation. Without that interpretation, the body doesn't exist, because Chinese mode of representation would dictate how the anatomy is treated. All of them knew anatomy. In the classroom, somebody asked whether they knew anatomy at all or not. I said that they, of course, knew anatomy, because otherwise the proportions would be very different. It would be very difficult to handle. Their concern was very fundamental, like how, if the anatomy suggests the bone structure like this, muscle structure like this, how will I show it while the body is moving? Body is in movement. The same with the theater people when they choreograph. Here is choreographing and representing at the same time. So this is the very well-known mural. I don't know how well-known it is to you, but it is a well-known mural called Medieval Saints. It occupies 3 walls of a building called Hindi Bhavan and shows the entire journey from left to right. It's not the complete mural, it shows only part of it. You have Surdas in the center, Tulsi was on the left, which is missing. This is Guru Govind, and so the Medieval Saints, it's called. It's a procession of saints leading to through Benares Ghat to a kind of arid region of Punjab where Guru Gobind Singh is leading it through Kabir and other people. This is the interpretive page of his anatomy book, where he is actually interpreting the anatomy. Here, further interpretations: faces, body, postures, etc., and movements. Now, each one of those studies, this is Nandalals, these are Nandalals, and the middle one is a collection from Java. So this masks basically, and the stuffs they collected also got translated for, or transcribed and translated for community purposes like Mela, for the fair, for the fairs they used to organize and festivities they used to have. They would use these masks for either performative purpose or distribution among the students. The cohabitation of the sustainable community-based design movement and the leap of creativity and the search for sense equivalence in cultural mapping, sustained a foundational episteme through the 100 years, variably, of course, with huge changes in size, shape, and quality, but it had to be, it has this useful retake in the form of curatorial interlude. There are two moments I'll discuss in brief. Well, the first moment was the Santal family, two of which I was involved in, and so I'm comfortable representing them. One was the Santal family, which some of you may have heard about, positions around an Indian sculpture, which took off on the basis of, from the Santal family image itself, the work Santal family itself. You saw the Santal family. It's a huge 9 feet tall sculpture, and you can't even think about moving it from that place, from Shantiniketan. So you had to devise a scheme by which people can participate on the idea of the sculpture. So we took the idea to 24 different people. It was participated by 24 people. 2 of them were no more, like Ramkinkar was no more, Ritvik Ghatak was no more. And we showed Ritvik's film on Ramkinkar. It was premiered, in fact, in that exhibition inside a tent. And inside the exhibition, I'll just quickly go to the pictures of it. And also touched upon the very well-known theater group movement, because the whole exhibition was also to touch upon the idea of community, because Ramkinkar was a community person, a completely community person in his entire life. And the murals and the sculptures, outdoor sculptures in Shantiniketan were dedicated to the community and were to be interpreted were open to interpretation by the community. So in a sense, IPTA, this wall was dedicated to IPTA, which is also seeing its anniversary this year. And you can see the first ever production by IPTA called Nabanno, and it's written, the very famous theater actors are all present here, Shammu Mitra and Bijan Bhattacharya in their younger days, and who participated. It starts, Balraj Shahani was involved, Prithviraj Kapoor was involved in this movement. So a lot of great guys from the Bollywood were involved at one point in that theater movement, because it was not just a theater movement, it was a social movement, part of the social movement. So this was the IPTA wall. We could only do a kind of, within our budget, could do a poster wall completely, filled with IPTA archival material. It's a large, huge wall. It's a huge wall. If we had stood there, you could have made out it's like about 12 feet tall, and starts from the ground. These are some of the central images. In the back, you see 100 drawings by K.P. Krishnakumar, who was a student in Shantiniketan during 87 to 89, and done those 100 drawings, actually. His 100 drawings were so very well known among the students, but hadn't seen. He somehow collected those 100 drawings, managed to collect, and managed to convince the museum to collect them so that it stays. Because Indian art's predicament is that it gets dispersed. And if the artist dies, then it's more so. And if you're very famous and very lucky, it will enter a museum and will never come out of the museum. So that is how I understand Indian art to be. And this is the center, bureaucracy, huge amount of bureaucracy. We are facing it at the moment, so I'm sorry I had to relate this to you. And this is, because it's in a European museum, we had the comfort of working, of transporting things, commissioning people, and working freely with the people, and given complete, enormous freedom of thinking. Nobody interfered, not an inch of interference, not an iota of interference. This is something that we commissioned to a Shantiniketan-based Santal artist. I mean, I'm referring to him Santal because he himself was a leader of a Santali movement, Boran Hasda, who was also a student in Kalabhavan at one point of time. And I saw him modeling. He has a fantastic hand of modeling, a knack for modeling. I was a jury on the jury for his final years, so I remembered him from there. And I found him out because you know that those of us who know Santals, they say they are in the habit of vanishing. They just vanish at some point and then reappear after 2-3 years or something from somewhere. So this guy also vanished. We had to dig him out from somewhere and then commissioned him. Fortunately, he delivered. And we are lucky that he delivered. And finally, it's in their collection. And then we had several people, like including Valsan Koleri, who had done a very fascinating and heavy work made of laterite stone. It's like a design. It's basically like a serpentine design, like a alpana, like a floral design, but it's like 4 feet tall. So children really enjoyed inside it. It looks like a bulbulaya, and it's heavy. It's few tons because it's made of stone. And he made them stay together. He produced grips inside it. He's a good sculptor, so he can make grips. It's the grippers. So there are grippers underneath which holds it together. So you don't need any binder. Just need grippers. Put them in the right slot, and it stays. It involves a huge amount of calculation to build this because it's handcrafted. So that's entire wall. There is a tree that you notice here on the left-hand side slide in the center at a distance. The sitting arrangement is like Shantiniketan sitting arrangement. This is not done by me. This is done by the designer who visited Shantiniketan. The designer is also an artist Goshka Matsuga. We left it to her to design the display, actually, because then it becomes kind of a dialogue between multiple people, not just me and another person deciding where things would go. So it becomes a dialogic process by which things emerge. So this is the center. It's a dead tree. We didn't cut off the tree. We found a dead tree. We planted it there. In fact, Goshka planted it there. And then he found the stray objects from Kolabhavan campus. These sculptures that you see, Ricky would remember that they throw it out in the backyard of the sculpture department. And so the sculptor Goshka is a sculptor herself, she got fascinated by those thrown away pieces. I also suggested this something to her that they can be utilized, and then we carried some of them all the way to the exhibition. So they are not commissioned works, they're thrown away works, and almost modernist works become anonymous because no student claimed it back. Because they are heavy. Sculpture by virtue of its nature, of material nature, they're heavy. They're cement sculptures this big. How can a student carry it back home? They'll be beaten up by their parents because of the sheer cost and sheer preservation problem. Like, why do you keep it? So a lot of it were actually stray objects. The second moment is the Bauhaus Imaginista. They call it Imaginista, so I'm pronouncing it in a German way, corresponding with that section. There are 4 sections corresponding with learning from, moving away, still undid. There are 4 sections into which is designed. 11 countries roughly participated, excluding Germany, but including Germany, 12 countries participated in that. Wherever Bauhaus left an impact either or builds a parallel. They saw Shantiniketan as a parallel, clearly. And it was convincing to them that it is a very clear parallel. And also that 1922 exhibition helped, because 1922, before that 21, Stella Cambridge, Rabindranath Tagore made Stella Cambridge in London or in Oxford, and through Johannes Eaton, and finally, and meets Johannes Eaton through Stella Cambridge. Cambridge was an art historian from Vienna School. Vienna School is a fountainhead of many of the early art historical ideas. Alois Reigel, Max Vorak, and such people taught there and worked there. So the early archaeologists of early 20th century worked there. So Cambridge comes from Vienna School, was fascinated by Indian art, she wrote a dissertation on Indian temple sculptures. And Tagore read that, and it was quite fascinating. Her observations on Indian art were quite acute, very sharp. And so, in that sense, Kramrisch suggested to Eaton that why don't you, and Kramrisch and Tagore, that why don't you bring a part of Bauhaus to Calcutta. So they hosted finally, and they sent immediately. There's no bureaucracy. It was sent immediately. So a lot of works, more than 100 works, were sent, including works by Kandinsky, original works by Klee, Paul Klee, and unlike what the rumor has it, that it got lost on the way later on, no, it never got lost. There are records in the Port Trust of both Calcutta and in Germany, which were found later, and they received the consignment back, except for one artist whose work got sold. Yeah, in Calcutta. The rest of it were all sent back. So it was not stolen. So there are a lot of books which were written building on that mystery of the stolen works. We were also fascinated by the mystery, but we never subscribed to that until the final documents surfaced from somewhere in the archive. Now, overview of the exhibition in HKW in Hakeva in Berlin, recently in March 2019. That's the second stoppage point. Not stoppage point, but second, what do you call it, moment of retake. You can see this is again like Goshka. This one is designed by another artist called Luca Frey, and he assisted the curators and the thematizers in thinking about how to reshape the whole exhibition, because there are 11 or 12 different fascinating sets of things to be coming, including from Africa and from China and from Japan and from India, all disparate and all different in style somewhat. Some are quite matching because they are kind of basically following Bauhaus as a model. Shantiniketan never followed Bauhaus as a model. They saw Bauhaus, the image fascinated them, but also they followed their own path. Only Gaganinath's work comes very close to Metzinzer, which is very fortuitous because Gaganinath also started along the same time, almost the same time. So it's a parallel development. He must have seen Cubism, definitely. But Metzinzer was not, strictly speaking, Cubism. They were Cubo-expressionists. So in a sense, some kind of combination or hybridization was happening, of which you can count Gaganinath as a part. So he got interested in Bauhaus also because of that. So there's this very close parallel, hence this is called, it's taken as a parallel. Now the front is, and left side is dedicated to Japan. So Japan and India were put together to some extent, side by side. This is Japanese wall. The modular question of Bauhaus was very cleverly addressed by the designer Luca Frey, who had taken the square grids of that exhibition hall of Hakeva as a modular unit and sort of replicated them, as you can see, the grids on the wall as a display technique. The grids were not there. They're created artificially. But then I didn't find it disturbing at all. Like in case of Shantiniketan, you will see very soon. This is Japanese. This typical Joseph Albers kind of scheme that they had followed, like positive and negative reversal and complementary contrast of different kinds that they experimented with in the early stage. You have to remember that it's the second decade of 20th century that this thing is happening. So design experiment is at its nascent stage, very beginning stage, in its childhood. These are Kawakita's design. There's this famous Japanese designer called Kawakita, and he was also a teacher of the Japanese school, which was moved by and influenced by Bauhaus in Tokyo. This is again Kawakita's design. These are all modular. You can see that one paper is slitted in different places and used as almost like origami. They already have an origami tradition, so that becomes very easy for them, and they're very adaptive in that sense. You know, Japanese reduces all the machines to smaller size. And if you tell them to a Japanese, you're going to have it. This is a book. They don't like critical comments. Very guarded against. These are, again, that Japanese book of design produced at that time, at the same time as that Bauhaus influenced school was instituted in Kyoto and Tokyo, Kawakita school. This is a close-up view of Luca Freist designing those Japanese things, modular objects, and displaying them. Because I think without them, a lot of things would be dull or would have fallen flat. So in a sense, you sometimes prop up the exhibition to make it more visible. Sometimes you'll have to do that, because if the building is not very interesting, then you'll have to make it interesting in some other way. The building is not. That was a lesson also I'm sharing with you. It's a lesson I also learned, because often you face a building which is really kind of disturbing or annoying. Sometimes you may not need this cross marks on the wall for your kind of exhibition, but then they will come on the way, unless you can remodel the exhibition in such a way that they get incorporated. Maybe the BDL won't allow me to change it, by their own rules and regulations. So they may not allow me to change it. So what do? I have to remodel my exhibition so as to suit it. So similar thing had been done by Luca Frey, because HKV can't allow you to change the grids on top. It's the ceiling grid. That's fixed. So he had invented the wall grid. This is Japanese section. This is a Japanese section still. The right-hand side is the Indian section, the center and the right. And you see a reading section floating in the middle. That's floating, literally. That's actually floating because the wires can't be seen. You can meet with an accident if you don't notice the wire. This is another part of Indian section. Details. This is another part. Those collected toys that I was talking about, they're exactly there from 1926 and 30s. Toys collected by Prabhat Mohan, who was a very avid and dedicated student who went to jail several times because of anti-British movement. Half the time he was in jail. And in jail he did a lot of charcoal drawings. This is the Indian section, which also shows Sahaj part, the primer. And the reading section, which shows those parts of the Vishwabharati News up to July 30s and 40s, which shows the continuous reporting back on the art events. This is a wall showing Shantiniketan, and lower down is sketchbooks of Krishna Reddy, who is no more, who died right when we were preparing for the exhibition. But somehow Jody had lent us the works and the pages from his sketchbook, which were done during his study in Shantiniketan under Nandalal. So of that time. So these are not rigged up stuffs, they're originals. Krishna Reddy, in case you don't remember him, he is a very well-known printmaker who invented viscosity along with in studio of Hayter, Stanley William Hayter studio, which he shared with, an invention he shared with the Japanese artist as well. But then on, he was in the United States. He had done sculptures as well as printmaking, a very well-known printmaker, artist from Shantiniketan. Now, this is a reading section. Reading section was very important because that sort of also gave a leeway for the people who don't know about the place into the culture of that place. So in a sense, people could sit and read up literature of the time, including Cranbridge's critique and writings. These are visitors. At the back, you see those Nandal's postcards were quite interestingly blown up because a lot of it were displayed in the vitrine, but from our previous experience, we noticed that people were not looking into the vitrine very carefully. So then the designer, it was designer's decision to blow it up. I only saw it in the last moment, but it was quite a good idea, I think. These are textiles which were produced in 1930s. These are whole, silk khadis, hand-spun silk khadis, done by Prabhat Mohan again, the activist artist. Hand-spun because he was also Gandhian activist who wanted to invent in terms of material and think as to how to build up an indigenous model of silk khadi, a khadi silk, hand-spun silk with block printing on it. They're block printed. And it was fortunately in a good shape, so we could. These are replicas of chairs designed by Rabindranath Tagore after his Japanese learning. And they come very close to the modular ideas of Bauhaus. They're very modular, like you can replicate them time and again. Even the contemporary carpenters, these are redone by contemporary carpenters after the design. CAD was produced, and from the CAD they replicated it. So it was replicated, replicas. Because the originals won't be lent. The replicas had to be sent. So these are replicas. And these are slide shows of various activities where women took the center stage, like for instance the batik and the alpana. The batik, you know, the Indonesian form of batik is something like, batik is something like you draw with wax and then dip it in color, and then it's like resist dye, wax resist dye. If you knew how textile is produced, wax resist dye, so you produce the resist with the wax, and then you crack it a little and dip it in color and then fix the color. And then remove the wax by running a hot iron on top. By putting a paper on top and then running a hot iron. So the wax gets removed, then you apply fresh wax and then apply fresh color. So it becomes overlapping color scheme with designs in various parts. This is the blown up postcards and the toys. And then this is the film. I forgot to label it. It's called O Horizon, produced on Shantiniketan by the Autolith group. Autolith is an international group of artists who produced a film on Shantiniketan on this occasion. It's called O Horizon. O Horizon is if you do earth mapping, you do earth soil profiling, then there are several horizons, they say. The soil scientists say there are several horizons that soil produces. O horizon is the level or the horizon from which plants grow, which means the fertile section of the soil. So it's on the O horizon. When they test the soil for fertility, they just dig with a certain scoop and then bring out one scoop of soil, and they find out which layer it comes from. And then accordingly, they label it. So they find how deep is the fertile soil. And in Birbhum, it is very important because it's a single crop yield state or region. So it's very important for the farmers to figure out how deep is the fertile soil. So according to which, you can either have a single crop yield or a double crop yield or 3 crop yield per year, which, farmers depend on that information to produce. Now, they took off from there and built upon the various cultural habits and habitus. So that's the film all about. We hope to show it again somewhere. This is the last scene of the film, almost street. Otolith's name is written on that. Learning from, part of Bauhaus in HKW Berlin, showing the NID part of the show. So NID was incorporated as in the other part of the show, which is called Learning From. And so NID, to some extent, apparently the researchers say that learned from, to some extent, a Bauhaus modular production. And because Bauhaus had production and design production and, industrial production brought under the same roof. In Shantiniketan, it was segregated. Like designing and production were two different units. Shantiniketan on the one hand, Sriniketan on the other. So you had two different units. One is producing design, the other is producing the object. So in a sense, it's segregated to some extent, but there's a kind of art-craft relationship. Of course, both are doing two kinds of activities. But in Bauhaus, it's all brought under the same roof, like in the modern design schools of India as well. So these are some of those basic objects of daily usage NID produced in its early years. That's about it, and thank you very much.